Good morning. It is Wednesday, November 15, 2023. You are here with the Clark County Council for a work session presentation on the all important topic of the 2024 annual budget. We are ready to begin, and Kathleen Otto, if you would like to kick this off.
Of course, thank you. So welcome. Feels like we just did this, but it was a year ago for the annual budget process, and I first want to start out by thanking all the electeds and the departments for intentional requests. This is a very large request, the largest that we've seen in the county, probably the hardest budget process I've been a part of because of knowing people's needs and have limited funding to help support all of those needs. But I do appreciate everybody's work that has gone into this process, and of course, Emily and her team for really managing this process from beginning to end, supporting all the departments and offices. So today we're going to talk about the annual budget process, a summary of the challenges, and actually also some recognizing some successes that we've had in the last year, the recommendations, property tax levies, receive any feedback and answer questions for council. And of course, if we don't have the answers today, we have some time and we can follow up with council before the hearing and discuss next steps. So just as a reminder for the roles and responsibility of the budget process, and there's different stakeholder groups that have different perspectives and insight in the process. The council is the ultimate decider. The legislative authority adopts the budget. The county manager receives the budget recommendations from departments and offices and then works with the different stakeholders, meets with all of the departments and offices, and then comes up with a recommendation to council. The finance team, which includes the budget director, the deputy treasurer, and the finance director, and also HR director, review the request as well with their lens and to provide feedback. The departments and elected officials submit the request based on what their needs are to provide or sustain services. And then the budget office manages the entire process, provides support to the departments and offices as we go through this. And then we do have some advisory boards and committees that review requests. This includes the public safety sales tax, mental health sales tax, advisory boards that actually review requests coming in and provide recommendations as well through the budget process. The county uses a traditional budget process and approach that focuses on the principles of transparency, communication, and collaboration in order to optimize resource allocation. Each year, the budget is prepared utilizing the baseline method, which starts with the current annual process and applies some adjustments. Any changes to that budget needs to happen through new requests submitted by the departments and offices. The timeline starts very early. I believe it was in early summer is when we started this process. And then the requests were submitted to the budget office by October 2nd. Actually, that's when they're published. The recommendations are published by, or all submit was published on October 2nd. On November 7th, the county manager provided the recommendations, and those were published. Today is the 15th of November, where we're presenting the recommendations to the council. And then the first week of December, we will have the public hearing. The first Monday is an opportunity for the separate elected departments, which is the treasurer, auditor, prosecuting attorney, clerk, assessor, and who am I missing? Let me look around. Assessor. There's 6 separate electeds, and then both courts also have an opportunity, the judges, to present any information that they also want to have that direct dialogue with the council. And then Tuesday is the actual budget hearing. We do have a placeholder for Wednesday if we do not have an adopted budget by Wednesday. And by statute, we do have to have an adopted budget by the end of that week. So just to go over some of the overview and challenges, and I would also say successes, and some of the things that have been happening this last year that have a direct impact to the budget. The first is the Baker Tilly wage adjustments. Like many organizations, the county has struggled historically with hiring and retaining employees. This is mainly due to 2 significant impacts. One, we had a lot of retirements that we knew were coming, and the other is competitive wages. The council did approve a set-aside for the Baker Tilly wage adjustments as we went through this process this last year. We have gone through that. The goal was to enhance the county's ability to recruit and retain high-performing employees for all roles across the agency. And then we also had to review internal equity as well as external competitiveness within the market. Those adjustments some have already been implemented. We had to bargain with our unions. I believe we have 3 that we're still bargaining with, and then the non-represented were also implemented. And I do want to thank the team again for their work on the Baker Tilly this process. It was a very lengthy and detailed process that took a lot of staff time under the treasurer, the sheriff's office, and Amber really led that process, supported by all the departments and offices. The second item here is the American Rescue Plan Act. As council knows, this is one-time funding that has come to the county in order to provide additional funding for impacts due to COVID. While we're moving into our post-COVID era, meaning it's a new normal, I don't think COVID's ever going to go away, but adjusting to those revenues, the one-time federal funding through this act is going to be coming to an end. All the ARPA requests must be committed by the end of 2024, and they have to be spent fully by the end of 2026. Some of the commitments that council has already approved and that has been implemented or is currently being implemented in the future include the homeless response system, small business grants for nonprofits and community serving organizations, the North Country EMS station, rural broadband expansion, the elections building remodel project, and foundational costs for the county's public defense office staffing model that council approved yesterday. Another, I would say, success in this last year is our capital budgeting and capital planning advisory committee. As mentioned in years past, the county has not had a history of planning for capital or budgeting it separately. There was this advisory committee that was formulated to really develop a multi-year capital plan and capital budget, looking at certain criteria. They also met very regularly this last year. The plan will include the 5 categories of facilities capital plan, information technology capital plan, transportation improvement program and annual construction program, stormwater capital plan, and parks and land division capital plan. The advisory committee again met, reviewed the recommendations, reviewed funding sources, priorities such as safety, what do we need to have done, what is mandated by statute, reducing our liability, and trying to come up with a forecast over the next forever, I guess, because there's a lot more capital needs than we have budget. So I'm very appreciative of that committee. The recommendations include about $84 million. This includes the TIP and the annual construction program and all the other programs that are listed, including the jail work center facility, and that's hardening the facility, and I'll go into that a little bit more here shortly. The elections building remodel project and others. So for the considerations for the annual budget, we really had to look at what are urgent and immediate needs, what can't wait. We have to prioritize based on limited funding, especially in our general fund, but a lot of our major funds do have a lot of pressure on it and it's not sustainable long term. Again, there is a lot of areas that we were not able to address because of the funding in future years. Considerations that were taken into account is the pressure on the many major funds, impact from increased demands in services, including mandates, rising cost, which includes like inflation, cost of doing business has gone up, cost of getting supplies, the supply chain issue, feasible options. We want to put sustainable options, but unfortunately, as you'll see in some of our forecasts, it's not sustainable because we're not balanced in a few years. That is always the goal, but since it's not necessarily sustainable, it's really what is feasible, what can we do right now? We need to maintain appropriate reserves, which is best practice, minimize the impact to services to our residents, and address critical needs and liabilities. So I'm going to be doing this a little different than the prior budgets because we have had so many requests. I'm not going to go through each individual one as I have in the past. All the information is online. I am going to provide a high-level overview of some of those requests in different categories right now, and then for like the public safety sales tax and the mental health sales tax, I'll discuss that a little bit more in the presentation. But just an overview. So for some of our capital items that are being considered or recommended today is $14.5 million that will be used out of the $20 million that council set aside for capital, and that's going to be dedicated to the Jail Work Center hardening to expand our bed capacity for the jail. Fencing around downtown and the judge's lot is included in the recommendation. Fairground projects, courthouse entry locks, district court window safety, also for elections, security film on the windows. The 2024 facilities projects, some outdated furniture, especially in Superior Court. Vehicles that some have been prior approved and others are carry forwards. Pavers in the courtyard and the drainage system, which is a safety issue. Replace data center, fiber, panel, and IT. Jail Work Center, they've had some equipment out there for cooking that hasn't been updated and is not functional, so like the braising skillet and tilting skillets. The shooting range on 192nd, again, that's also a safety issue. We need to make sure that if we have residents or staff using that we don't have an issue with bullets ricocheting off of debris that's where they're shooting towards. Public Works has some equipment requests such as backhoes, a trailer for the mini excavator, truck-mounted variable message sign, and Superior Court digital scroller. Right now, there's somebody who's actually typing in every day who's going to be in what courtroom, so this would be a digital opportunity so we can get that up for them. And then some intercom cameras for Superior Court. Some of the annual amounts that we see every year is the Transportation Improvement Plan for the 2024-2029 plan, including also the Parks and Lands Capital Improvement Plan, Stormwater, Fleet, contractual increases that we need to adjust for every year. Again, supply increases, the cost for that. General liability insurance has gone up. Other insurance, including medical, we're seeing double-digit increases. Postage continues to go up. And then there's some special items, like one, for example, is it is a presidential election year next year, so there needs to have some budget capacity for elections to pay for costs up front. And then for the levies, I am recommending a 1% general fund, and I will go over these in more detail later on the slide. 1% for the Public Works or Road Fund and bank capacity, and also 1% for parks and MPD. Extend the current project employees that we have for additional 2 years to help maintain that level of service. We'll talk about, again, the mental health sales tax and the public safety sales tax in the presentation. And we'll also talk a little bit more about FTE, but we really tied the FTE request to those, again, if they're a project position, extending them for 2 years, has to have a tied revenue source to them. So if we don't have a revenue source that's already identified, then those were not being recommended. And then also other items that are not being recommended is ongoing general fund impacts that are not required. And you'll see that in the forecast that the ongoing amount is pretty minimal. Other staffing, like I said, we'll talk about staffing a little bit. You know, there was a lot of requests this year, more than 100 FTE requests. The Superior Court had a lot of staffing requests. The jail staffing had some requests. There are some that are being recommended through the public safety sales tax, but not all of them that have been submitted. Overtime is not being recommended. The reason being is we do help evaluate that during the year. And towards the end of the year, we ask departments and offices to use savings within their own budget to cover the cost of overtime, use salary savings, and then if needed, then we'll look at using contingency that's set aside to help them come within budget. I'm hearing, is that Councilor Mevigi? That's okay. about which counselors are available? And are you talking about counselors? Okay, so I can tell you for, can you help him just get it? He just needs to have it muted.
Mm-hmm. Counselor Mevaji, do you want me to fix it real quick?
No, it's okay. And Crystal, why don't you take that from him? And then I can note, Counselor Mevaji, that Counselor Young is online, Chair Bowerman is online, Counselor Belcott is not present this morning. And then for those who are listening, Counselor Mevaji and Counselor Marshall are in the hearing room. I have a counselor. I agree. Okay. And then one other item that is not being recommended that we'll talk about as well is the 1% for conservation futures. Of course, if there are specific packages that council has questions on, we can address those out, during this meeting or before the hearing as well. But like I said, we have more than 300 packages, and I don't think it will be beneficial for me to read all 300 or more. Okay, so for current and continuing challenges that the county is facing, again, the rising cost of salaries and benefits. Normally, I think we budget 5% for benefits, and I believe that's double digits. That's coming up for 2024. And then salaries, Baker Tilly study, we actually implemented the one-time cost that council set aside, but we still have escalations over the year, whether it's collective bargaining agreement or steps. Inflation, again, is increasing cost, capital project needs, increasing demand for services, and we do have some outdated systems and infrastructure that we're starting to address through the capital plan, but there's a lot more needs than we have funding for. So for new position requests, as I mentioned, we had over 100 new position requests in this budget process, which is the most that we've ever seen in a budget process. Due to the structural deficit in the general fund, and again, that is simply expenses exceeding revenues year over year, it's not feasible to recommend most of the positions at this time. It does not, I want to make it clear, this is not because they're not needed or they're not important. We just don't have the funding to pay for them and sustain it. So that is an issue. The 2024 budget proposal, we limit the number of additional new permanent positions that have been either recommended by the advisory groups or paired with a revenue source. So again, the public safety sales tax had some positions that were recommended through that process. Those are all being fully recommended to council. And again, we are extending existing project positions for an additional 2 years. By policy or collective bargaining agreement, project positions are normally 24 months or 12 months or 24 months. Most of them are 24 months. So this is an exception to policy to allow departments to continue with those services. Normally, when the 2 years is done, that position goes away as it's not a regular ongoing FTE. Some of the next steps that we'll be meeting with our senior leadership team, and I believe we're meeting in a couple weeks, as we're looking into the future, as we do our 6-year budget forecast, we're also going to be looking at 6-year FTE forecasts. And that doesn't always necessarily mean how much more do we need in 6 years. We really need to look at what the services are being provided. Is there going to be any impacts that may change or reduce that? For example, if the city of Vancouver annexes, and if they annex, say in 5 years, out to their boundary, that will have an impact on what we need to provide services. We wouldn't necessarily be responsible for the roads or public safety in those areas. So these are things that we need to take into account. And with that said, even if the annexation happens, there are some departments that it won't impact because they have countywide services now, and that will be maintained even if the city takes over a certain portion. Also, another piece that we'll be reviewing is the Baker Tilly Project Phase 2. This is looking at the benefits, and this will be starting in 2024. And we have an MOU right now with all the departments and collective bargaining agreements, I think, except for 2 in the sheriff's office that are included, which details the cost share between the county and the employee and the level of medical benefits that are implemented. So that will be a key discussion next year as we're looking at this long term. Also part of the Baker Tilly Phase 2 is reviewing job descriptions as well. And part of that benefit review, in addition to medical, is like time off. So it's the whole compensation package: holidays, time off, sick leave, vacation versus PTO. How much is it based on our market comparables? Okay, so going over the general fund forecast overview. Just as a reminder, and we'll see this in the next slide too, but over 2/3 of our general fund is personnel related. So that is salaries and benefits. We did have an unexpected growth in our sales tax revenue over the last couple of years. We're seeing that level off now to a more normal increase, so that will return to the year-over-year projection of 4.2%. And as if you remember, well, some of you may not have been here, but at the end of last year, we did change the baseline number for the general, or for the sales tax coming in, to recognize that significant increase that we had that was more than what was projected. And you'll see in the 6-year forecast as a general fund, 6-year forecast continues to have that structural deficit where expenses are growing faster than the revenues. And again, the requests that are being made and submitted, for, especially for general fund dollars, far outweigh the anticipated revenue capacity to offset them. So the first pie chart here, this just breaks out from our major revenue categories. We do have hundreds of revenues. These are the major ones. So as you can see, the property tax is about 41% of our revenues that we receive, about $79 million. Sales tax is about 33% at $64 million. And then all the other revenue sources equals about 26%, which includes transfers, charges for goods and services that include like jail bed days and revenues, court fees, and then intergovernmental revenues as well, which are like interlocal agreements between other public agencies. This is just another snapshot of what the current allocation is, and then you can see it out for 6 years. This assumption and forecast does not reflect any recommendations for today. It really is just showing where we're at for the annual adoption for 2024. You can see the projected growth on the right. So for property taxes, it's about 2.5%. Sales tax is about 4.2%. And the remainder of the revenue sources are pretty much coming in within budget, or then the remaining flat over the years. The next pie chart, this is the expense side of the general fund. Again, you can see salary and benefits is about 70% of our general fund, with about 49% in the salaries and 20% in the benefits. That's people. That's what helps us provide our services, is people. We do not make widgets. We don't. Our job is services. And I will note for general fund as well, about 70% of the general fund is supporting law and justice, which is the courts, the prosecuting attorney, and the sheriff's office. Again, the services line item on here on other expenses are like professional services contracts, and again, intergovernmental items here is the interlocal agreements with other governmental agencies. And of course, you see supplies and other expenses. The next slide also shows, again, that 6-year forecast for the expense assumptions that has the projected growth. Again, this does not include any recommendations for today. And you can see salaries are projected out with a 3% increase year over year. Benefits at 5%. Again, we're seeing way more than 5% for 2024. And then you can see the services and supplies are trending at about 2%. Again, this is a forecast without the recommendation. The beginning fund balance on this one is the 79.9 million. Total revenues is 195 million. Expenditures is 203. As you can see, even with that initial number there for 2023, the expenses are more than the revenues. The forecast modifiers and the fiscal year-end projections, which include the spring and fall supplemental, are listed down below the purple color. The forecast includes the Baker Tilly financial impact. Again, that was a one-time impact set aside. I believe it's the 4%. Was it 4 million-ish that was set aside? 3.75. But that was one time. It did not account for the year-over-year increase with the higher salary range. Projecting ending fund balance is about 68 million. The compensated absences, just as a reminder, is about 20% of the leave. So if everybody left, how much is that cash out? That's about 2.33 million. Non-spendable encumbered invoices at 1.7. Those are invoices that we know are coming, but they have not been paid yet. The minimum fund balance is about 32.2 million, and that's about 60 days expenses or operating costs. And then the capital there for the 20 million, that's the amount council set aside for capital projects. And one note too on the bottom here is where you can see, even again, this has no new recommendations for 2024, but in 2028 and 2029 at the very bottom, the red circle, that's the structural deficit. That's where you can see the expenses are exceeding the revenues and how that's going to be impacted. Go ahead, Emily.
If I may, I just wanted to add, this slide was meant to really tie into what the council saw for the fall supplemental. So you're seeing the 2023 year end that aligns. And then one thing I wanted to point out in the blue, you see that 20 million at the bottom for the capital that you guys set aside for 2023. We moved that up to available fund balance for the 2024 recommendations, which is that second column. And that's where Kathleen's recommending and talking about for today.
Okay, so this is just where the recommendations are online. It is under the budget department 2024 budget. Like I said, I did the summary earlier, but the specific decision packages and everything is already posted online. And then the next slide just shows the summary by number. So again, we had 306 requests this year, which is huge. We had 18 budget neutral, which are usually grants, so the revenue and the expenses are the same. 36 carry forward, which are items that were already approved but haven't been fully spent, so we need to carry forward that funding into 2024. 29 was previously approved by council, so you've already approved this mostly in the Tuesday council meeting. There was one technical adjustment, which usually has like a coding error or something, so it's just, there's no impact to the budget, it's just correcting a technical mistake or oversight. There were 222 new requests, and then there are 76 requests that are not being recommended today. Okay, so for the general fund recommendations, so this slide I'm going to show it two different ways. One includes the 1% levy increase that's being recommended, and then the next slide does not include the 1%, so that council can see the difference between the two. And we do have a slide outlining all of the levy amounts and what revenue that means, and also what's the cost to the households. And I'll just say it for this right now, a 1% for general fund, the revenue received would be about $760,000, and that's per year. So that would be for this year. If for next year, there was or for 2025, if there was another 1%, it would be cumulative. So it would be the 759 times 2. That cost for the general fund is $4.03 per year, and that is based on the median household price of $520,000. So it will adjust a little bit based on that dollar amount, but it is about just over $4 a year in order to capture the $759,000. The one other thing, I'll go through this really quick as well. As we look at the projected ending fund balance or available fund balance in future years, keep in mind that that does not include any other new requests in future years. It does have some of the escalations for salary benefits that we put in over 6-year forecast, but for any new requests, it does not include that beyond the 2024. So the beginning fund balance for the general funds is about 80 million. The revenue is 195 million. Am I doing the right numbers? I'm looking at 2023, aren't I?
Yeah, we're going to start with the orange column. So the beginning fund balance is that blue 68 million for 2024.
I have to print them so I can see it. No, you're good. Okay, so the 68 million is the beginning fund balance. The total revenues is 193 and expenditures is 190. The forecast modifiers for 2024 include the spring supplemental impacts of the almost 5 million, and the fall supplemental impact as well, 256,000. The projecting ending fund balance is about 67 million, and I won't go over the available funds calculation again. It just, again, calculates the compensated absences, the non-spendable encumbered invoices, the minimum fund balance per policy, et cetera. That leaves the projecting available fund balance at 31 million. As you can see, in 2025, we do have a little bit of an increase in the available fund balance, but again, that does not include any new requests for 2025, and then it starts to reduce over the years. And this, again, does not include recommendations for 2024. Yes, go ahead, Councilor.
If I could just ask a quick question while we're on this page. The, under 2023, that 20 million capital projects provided by the auditor's office, is that not a number that will carry through in the remaining years? It's just...
It will not. So what we did to try to accommodate for the requests that are being recommended for 2024, if you see it's blue, we took that 20 million and we put it back into the beginning fund balance in 2024. Of that, a little over 17 million has been recommended. So that kind of flows through the process for that final fund balance after recommendations with the 1% of that 5.5 million. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
And I do want to apologize. I don't think I was hitting the right numbers. In order for me to see, I had to blow it up. So I do want to call out in the 2024 column, the adopted recommendations for 2024 is almost $5 million, which does reduce that available fund balance. So the available fund balance at the end of for 2024 would be 5.57 million. And then if you look forward, it reduces every year, 3.3 million, 682,000, and then we're in the negative in 2027. On the bottom of here, you can see the second, the larger red circle, and that's the operating surplus or deficit. You can see in 2025, we have a negative 1.4 million. So what that means right now is that we're dipping into a one-time fund balance to balance the budget, which is why it's not negative projecting available fund balance for 2025. By 2027, we won't have any more fund balance available. And again, this does not include any changes for 2025 and 2026. We anticipate that we're going to be working with the senior leadership team starting in 2 weeks, potentially looking at reductions for 2025 to ensure that we can come in within a balanced budget.
And I just wanted to add that that bottom part that talks about the structural deficit, I think is key for the council to understand, as well as the rest of the county. That's where it's not feasible to recommend new positions ongoing. That's where it's not feasible to recommend ongoing new programs, because it should fit, any recommendation like that should fit into the revenues that we receive. Dipping into one-time fund balance, as you can see, is not going to last forever.
Madam Chair, if I could. I will. So I'm just going to kind of think out loud in this as we pause on this, because This is the most focus I've seen in any of these presentations I've sat through on our structural deficit. So here's my experience. One, these slides have looked exactly the same every year, pretty much. I mean, there's dollars slipping out different years in different amounts, but pretty much the way I view this, we have, we maximize all of our expenditures, which is what an accountant should do, and we minimize all our possible revenues, which is a conservative view on what we should do, and that paints a pretty good picture, but always paints diminishing fund balances out in the year. So, when I looked at this budget process in 2019, it was the same thing. Hey, we've got a structural deficit, we're not going to have any money in 3 or 4 years. At one point, I worked with your office on, okay, well, what's the cause of this? Are we not managing our funds, or is the state tax structure that poor? And so the message I received back was, and I believe it's true, that we are doing the very best to manage the minimum amount of funds that we have at the local level. The state gets the vast majority of all the taxes that are collected, as well as the schools and some of the other levies that are out there. But, I had asked, the second answer I got was, well, we have a tremendous problem with tax leakage. And we've stopped discussing that over the last few years because our sales tax went through the roof during the pandemic, and it is leveling off, as you pointed out. And that may have somewhat hidden that issue of tax leakage, but it was in the vicinity of about $25 million a year, roughly, or $250 million over 10 years. We could do the best we can to forecast what we're losing because we're right next door to Portland and Oregon's tax-free shopping situation. And the fact that we at one point experienced 40% plus in sales tax increase, would it have been 60% or 80% had we not had the tax leakage? So we've kind of discussed the issue of the tax leakage with our local legislative delegation, but I believe that situation is still there. The second part that I got from your office was, I said, okay, if we took all bank capacity, if we took every tax opportunity we had, what does that chart look like? And essentially, it doesn't look that much different. We still have a structural deficit. It still looks bleak in the outlying years because of the way our tax structure and the way our accounting practices look at it. So at some point, we need to get back to the tax leakage issue. Every year, the legislature looks at reforming how our taxes are collected and distributed in the state, and I don't even think it ever gets into committee to result in an actual bill or tax change. So that's an ongoing process in Olympia. But I just did want to highlight those because even if we take all possible taxes, and I know there's a bill floating out there, at least one party is really pushing hard to have that 1% cap eliminated, and I've seen different numbers mentioned, but basically the ability then for the local entity to tax 2 or 3 or 4 or 5% in addition each year. We have inflation to deal with, and whether or not that's now finally getting under control, as Wall Street seems to think, I don't know, but that impacts everything we do. Right-sizing the government is what we need to do and be cognizant of, and I think the management and finance team does an amazing job at that. But so I don't want the public to be focused just on the structural deficit. It has always existed. It will always exist under our current tax structure because of our accounting practices and how we manage the numbers. So I did want to just give that kind of public service announcement, as these slides have always, you know, I've only got the last 5 years of experience of looking at them. I don't know how they looked 10 years ago or 20 years ago, but pretty much, since we're focusing so much on the structural deficit, I just wanted to give you my point of view.
Counselor, just a couple of comments on that. You are correct, because we had the increase in sales tax and over the last 2 years, and the one-time funding that came in, the forecast has looked differently over the last 2 years. If we didn't have that increase, we were, I believe, negative $5 million starting out for 2023. So the 2023 budget would have looked very different, because that one time it bought us a couple of years. And we do have savings every year, so that does also contribute to this. But there is from my perspective, a grave concern on this, because it will impact, unless, we can get more information on the sales tax leakage. I think the online sales also helped us, that we were not getting that before. And I do have the history, I just don't have it in front of me, and I will get that and send it to council, of the 1% historically, what would it have changed, and also looking forward, because that does change a little bit of the narrative. It didn't completely fix it. And I do think our county is unique in that we have urban and rural services. Most counties only have rural. And so in some capacity, we're acting like a city without all the city revenues. So, but I appreciate your comments.
Shop locally or online.
Right. Go ahead, Counselor.
I have just, I think there's a lot of slides to get through before we start philosophizing about budgets, but I don't recall it looking like this last year, and because of all those additional kind of windfalls that we received, and I know, you know, what compelled the Baker-Tilly study is that I believe we continually fell behind in terms of salaries, being competitive. So we've, I believe, corrected for that, and that places more demand on the budget. My concern would be if we don't continue to be able to provide those salaries, be competitive, that we'll again get ourselves in a hole and will not be able to provide the services. So I think there's different ways to look at what this structural deficit represents. And I think looking at historical patterns and what that meant in terms of staffing and services would be very good to look at.
And I can say over time, staffing hasn't really increased in the county. But yes, we can get that information as well and include that, share it before the hearing, also at the hearing. Before I move on, the next slide's going to be the same 6-year forecast without the 1%. But before I move forward, I just wanted to check in with Councillor Young or Chair Bowerman to see if you had any questions before I moved on.
I don't, Kathleen. I've looked at this in great detail before our meeting today, and I think it's very clear. I do look forward to seeing impacts with and without the 1% levy increase on staffing, not on salaries, which would be the Baker-Tilly thing, but on total numbers of staff. And that's a little bit different question. So anyway, good job and thank you.
Okay. Councillor Young, did you have any questions?
I don't. I've got some questions and comments
Okay.
that will come a little bit further forward in the presentation.
Okay, thank you. And again, feel free to ask questions if you think of them now. Okay, so the next slide is the same, so it shows the same numbers with the recommendations. The only changes is this does not include the 1%, which basically moves the negative fund balance from 2027 to 2026. So it just makes it come before us a little quicker because we won't have, it's about $750,000 a year for the 1%. So this would not include that for the 2024 and moving forward.
Madam Chair, I wanted to interject one other point in part based on what you and Sue had just said. You know, that as far as the government services, you know, we had a tremendous focus on our sheriff's office a couple of years ago, you know, and the statistics that we had the worst deputy to population ratio in the country. And, you know, that really struck home because pretty much our justice system is the core function we provide, because no one else can provide that. The private sector is not going to do that. And we don't want militia out there. But the reality is Washington State is like the worst state in the country for law enforcement. I mean, it's just kind of a cultural thing that we don't invest in law enforcement, and I think we should. Same thing for the PA's office, the courts, our new public defense office. You know, our judicial sector is something only government can provide. But it really is a deep and dark hole. I mean, you can throw as many bodies at it as you think you can afford, but the only way you can afford it is to tax the heck out of everybody. So I just wanted to highlight, that's the point I was trying to make before. I mean, this is a tough balance, and I think the manager's doing a good job in rejecting all those additional positions. And because of public safety sales tax, we were able to add more in law enforcement, not only to the sheriff's office, but to our jail services, where they were desperately needed. We really were far behind. So, I mean, whether it's animal control, permitting, code enforcement, you name it, across the board, yeah, this could be a growth industry. We could add bodies to it. And, of course, behind the scenes, I've constantly been complaining about code enforcement and permitting and animal control, you name it, or, you know, our environmental enforcement out there. But we just have to right-size it. And what can we afford? Where are we short in personnel? And throwing personnel at issues is not necessarily always the solution. Just doing things better and smarter, which I think our public defender's office is going to do. I'm hoping that not only keeps the quality of defense services up, but improves it at a better bang for our tax dollar. So, you know, we need to constantly look for efficiencies, which I know you are. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. If you look at other counties similarly situated to our population, we are not extravagant in the number of full-time personnel that we have. Of course, there's a lot of consultants out there that kind of artificially hide the employees that we are supporting. But anyway, I mean, there's a government, it could be a growth industry, and of course, we have philosophical differences on how that should look. But, you know, public safety, first and foremost, our first responders, fire suppression, you know, you name it, those are our core functions. Everything else is just, you know, other than water, septic, sewer, you know, our watershed protection, you know, all those are of lesser importance than keeping our civil society operating in a lawful way. Anyway, I just wanted to throw those comments in because we could double the size of our county personnel staffing right now, but we can't afford it, and nor do I have any desire to put that burden on each and every taxpayer out there, especially those that are barely surviving right now under the tax structure we have.
Okay, so the next part is actually talking about the public safety sales tax. As noted, this was approved by the voters in 2022, most largely part to fund the body-worn cameras. And I want to extend my appreciation, and I know the council's appreciative and the staff to the voters for approving that. It is fully funding the body camera program as the constituents had voted for. The revenue that we're receiving can also fund other services to make sure that the county was providing good stewards of the voter-approved funding. There was established Public Safety Sales Tax Funding Advisory Committee. This committee had a lot of stakeholders representation from Law and Justice, the County Council, the Finance Team, Budget Office, IT, and Facilities. They were tasked with making recommendations on how to spend the tax and also prioritizing on how, what the recommendations would be coming forward. What is being recommended to council through the public safety sales tax recommendation is continuing or expanding the body-worn camera program. The Sheriff's Office asked for a couple campus deputies and transport extradition that would be added for the downtown campus. Corrections officers and sergeants in the jail services. These employees would actually allow us to open the jail work center as soon as we get it hardened, where we're going to have folks staying down there. A jail canine drug program, and district court's electronic home monitoring program. I'm very sincerely thankful to the leadership of this advisory committee. It was new. Again, there's a lot more requests that came forward that could not be recommended because there wasn't enough funding or maybe didn't hit the higher prioritization, but I believe it was a good process and a process that will be utilized moving forward. The public safety sales tax, so this is the 6-year forecast that you can see here, where the beginning fund balance was about 1.6 million. The sales tax for 2024 is 7.5. It's a little bit less because it was based on less than a year because there's a lag in collecting the tax. I believe is it 10 months? Okay. And so the total revenues for 2024 will be 7.5 million, and then you can see the expenditures. A lot of it on the salary piece, under the pink, that was due to the corrections deputies contract negotiation as well as deputy sheriff's guild contract negotiations. So those contract increases that council approved as part of their collective bargaining agreements are included in the salary and benefits up top, as well as the chief administration or chief of administration, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing the title, that was hired by the sheriff or appointed by the sheriff that's overseeing the implementation of the body camera program. The budget modifiers there, you can see it includes the 2023 supplemental. We did also have a fall supplemental. These were all included in the, for body cameras, additional FTE for PDRs and other uses on that. And so you can see the total budget modifiers, forecast modifiers is about $4.4 million. The projecting ending fund balance at 1.7 million, minimum fund balance per policy, which is 1 month actual cost and 2 months actual cash receipts. And so that equates just about 1.5 million, which leaves an available fund balance for this year for new requests of 271,000. You can see that increasing over the years, but I think it's a good placeholder for that number. I know the fund balance policy will be reviewed. It is new to make sure it makes sense, and I assume that that's going to happen with this process next year as they're tracking costs and seeing what needs are as well in the future. Okay, so the next one is the mental health sales tax funding. So just as a reminder that this is also one of our fund advisory groups that was established back in 2018, and they also contribute valuable time and expertise and provide budget recommendations through this process. I am fully supporting the recommendations as well with the mental health sales tax that's being recommended. The board is comprised of representatives from community services, law and justice, the county council, and public health. The advisory board is recommending about $5.1 million in funding for the 2024 community grants, $886,000 of ongoing funding for internal department office programs and staffing, and about $2.5 million in additional funding for the motel voucher program and capacity building for small nonprofit funding requests. The next slide shows the 6-year forecast, which incorporates those requests. This is one fund that we do see an increase in fund balance over the years. It is very prescribed on what can and cannot be spent out of the mental health sales tax. We do recognize the importance of this tax and ensuring that it's hitting the services in the community. And so I know that there's a lot of ongoing discussions about this on how it can be utilized. Maybe in the jail, I know it's tapped into a little bit of this and others. it looks like they're, and you can see in the adoption changes, which is under the blue, 8.7 million for 2024. The ongoing amount is just about 1.2 million moving forward. So it's really a larger hit for one time versus ongoing, which leaves an ending fund balance about 11.7 million.
If I could make a brief comment on this, I know Glenn is actively engaged. I really want to implore my fellow counselors to look at this fund balance. So there were a couple, I don't know whether it was 2 years or 3 years, we weren't spending any of it. And even after this last round, and I heartily support the recommendations that have come out of the committee, as the Public Safety Committee as well. I think we're doing what the public expects with this money. However, we shouldn't be banking this. We need to get it out in the community. And that, with a little advocacy, I mean, we do know that some of this money can be used for supportive housing as it impacts health care. Mental health care. I mean, there's drug programs as well that could be roped into this. I really want to see another round for this. I want to maybe see 2 rounds because we didn't spend enough out of this money. It's just sitting in the bank after collecting it from our taxpayers. It shouldn't be there. We need to get it out into the community. These fund balances are out of balance. They're way in excess of what the minimum fund balance should be.
Chair?
Just following up on that, what are the assumptions as far as what is a healthier best practices required minimum balance?
So if I answer, I hope I get this right, let me know if I'm understanding your question. We do have the minimum fund balance policy, that's that second from the bottom line. That accounts for all of the risk and contingency, rainy day things that the community, the advisory board thought would be essential to sustain the fund. So beyond that, we have that 11.7 million available that is ready to be spent if there's an applicable and allowable cost for that. Just wanted to mention that the advisory board did come up with a good recommendation this year, and that was to set some funding aside for coaching and advisory to the small nonprofits. A lot of the applications that were received they need some help in order to be able to apply and be able to spend these funds appropriately. So that group was able to set some of that aside. That's part of that 2.5 million bullet at the bottom. And I do think that that's one way they hope to address some of this gap and being able to get the money out to specific community sources.
And unfortunately, during COVID, the money that was allocated for that first year, the service providers either couldn't because of the restrictions that were in place, or they didn't have the staffing to fulfill those contracts. But Councilor Meviji, I don't think anybody disagrees with you. We need to make sure that we're getting this spent in the appropriate needs.
Chair?
Go ahead, Glenn.
Thank you. I wanted to just kind of further comment, and I thank Emily for that great description of our conversation, but there was considerable discussion kind of repeatedly every time we met together with our frustration in our ability to fund many of the applications that came in, and there were multiple reasons why we were not, and a lot of it led to the fact that the small nonprofits, they don't have grant writers, they don't have budget, people that can help them develop a legitimate budget. They don't have that experience to be able to grow. They have a strong desire to do good, and they have the experience that they bring with them. And so we were very frustrated to have to say no to a lot of the applications based on some of those reasons. And so that is where we came forward with this idea of kind of an incubator, a program that we can develop to help those nonprofits kind of hold their hand in those beginning processes to help them to grow, because that is also another problem that we're experiencing in our community is that we don't have enough nonprofit expertise that are capable of kind of, ramping up their current what they're doing. They don't have the ability to scale. They don't have the ability to grow to be able to fill the needs of our community. So that is one of the big things that we talked about, and it kind of leads towards the goal of being able to use all the funding that is in that program. Like I said, we had a lot of applications that came in that we had to say no to, and it was very frustrating to have to do that. And so hopefully with this incubator program that we're working on, we can get to a point where we can better spend and allocate those dollars, but not just do it because it's there, but do it in a way that we know is going to be effective and productive.
So thanks for that, Glenn. I look forward to hearing more. We don't want to add administrative costs to this money to get it spent, but on the other hand, boy, maybe an office or a consultant or some other kind of help for our nonprofits. So maybe, as I was suggesting, doing another round, that maybe not the entire solution if we don't have people applying. But out in the community, I constantly am hearing from the nonprofits, oh, I didn't know there was a grant round. I mean, they didn't even apply. I mean, I think there's a lot of capacity out there that hasn't even sought these grants, whether it was our ARPA funding grants for nonprofits or the mental health sales tax. I still would urge another round, but I look forward to seeing the development of a program that may facilitate getting this money out in the community.
So it looks like we lost the chair. And I would just say, Chair, if you have called in, if you can hit *3 to raise your hand, then we can see you and move you back over. Yeah, so somebody just raised their hand. So, Kristen, if we could just check to make sure it's her, that would be great.
It's me.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Absolutely.
Okay, so the next one is the road fund 6-year forecast. This also includes, this first slide also includes the 1%. The second slide will not include the 1%. And again, we'll have a summary on a few slides out, but 1% for the road fund and bank capacity, so the 1% and bank capacity is a total of $5.80 a year. And that includes revenue of the 1% is just over $485,000 a year, and bank capacity is just over $20,000. And that's, again, is based on the 2023 median household price of $520,000. So the 6-year forecast, you can see the beginning fund balance of $41 million, the revenues of $61.3 million, expenses $46.3, proposed change request equates about $4.6 million, and you'll see the remaining road fund remaining for capital of $10.4 million. This is pursuant to the Washington Administrative Code. And then we have the TIP, Transportation Improvement Program, revenue of $21.3 million, expenditures of $37.1 million. So you can see there the expenditures are exceeding revenues with an ending fund balance of $35.8 million, leaving a projected available fund balance of $24.7 million. Let's look in here, and you can see that the projecting available fund balance, it does increase a little in 2025, and then it starts to reduce after that because of the expenditures exceeding revenues. The next slide is the same forecast, but not including the 1%. And this 2020 9, I believe, is when we'll see the change in that fund balance, where with the 1%, we had a 13.9% available, and without the 1%, it has been reduced down to 10.8 million.
Could I ask a question? What's the history on us taking the 1% related to the road fund over the years? And coupled with that, with the banked capacity, does that diminish every year that we don't take it, or does it hit some level and stay there?
I didn't hear the first part of the question. Is it?
The history on taking 1% for the road fund.
We can provide that for you, just like we're going to do with the general fund. Last year, the council did approve the 1% plus bank capacity. And then when the council does not take the 1%, it is banked, but it does diminish year over year. And it's a quite complicated formula, but we can go through that more if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would add that there was some lack of trust years ago, many public works directors ago, not the current one, on those numbers. And some of those slides look really dismal. I mean, they were diminishing to nothing within just a few years, even taking the bank capacity. And then the numbers just kind of miraculously righted themselves when we got another public works director. But so historically, looking back at those slides, you know, we have to be critical of it.
And I will say, I mean, there's a lot of projects that is coming out of the road fund, and I think we just need to be cautious on even the current numbers being shown, because I think capacity, like staffing capacity, can also incorporate an artificial and higher number, because they can't get all the projects done if they don't have the staff to do. So it's, and eventually, as we develop in certain areas, we also need to be mindful as we go through those processes that we can still maintain our current roads as we develop new roads. Okay. And then the next one is the planning and code fund. So this is the first year that we're providing the 6-year forecast. So all of our major funds for the first time now are consistent on doing the 6-year forecast. You can see the beginning fund balance of 13.1 million. The recommendations, well, the revenues is 13.6 million, expenditures 13.1. The recommendations before council is about 739,000, which after the fund balance policy, the minimum fund balance, it's projecting a fund balance of 4.27 million. We do see a little bit of an uptick next year, and then it does decrease. One of the things we need to keep in mind on here, and that staff is working on in 2024, is the wetland and habitat and land use. So those are the fees that haven't been updated in years, and the general fund is subsidizing because we don't have enough funds to cover those funds. And I think that's the 1 million transfer in line under the revenue is the general fund subsidy to ensure that there's a balance. So council will be hearing more about these fees, hopefully, I think it was in first quarter of 2024. Maybe the beginning of second quarter, I'll give them a little leeway, but I know that Mark Gasaway's group is going to be assisting, and then we'll look for other assistance if needed. Okay, REIT 1, the 6-year forecast on here. Oh, of course, go ahead.
Sorry about that. There appears to be quite a bit of a delay. So the 4.7 million, 4.4 down on the bottom. Oh, nope, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong number, but the projected available fund balance for new requests. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So that's the funding that is not, that's above and beyond. It's available for new requests, I guess is the best way to say that.
So that is essentially funding that hasn't been allocated to anything.
Correct.
I didn't understand that, Glenn. Would you please repeat?
Yes, I was just clarifying that those are funds that are going to be available theoretically, projected, that are not currently allocated to any particular expense.
Right, thank you.
Do you have any other questions, Counselor Young?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're getting there. I think there's two more. So a REIT 1, this is the less restrictive of the REIT funds, the real estate excise tax. And this is one that, you can see the fund balance growing at the bottom from 7.9 million for this year to 57 million. But again, these are tied to capital. So we do still have more capital needs than what is projected here. As the capital program is being developed, this will become more clear in years to come. I mean, they did a lot of work this year, but it's going to be an ongoing process to, we got a really good, solid recommendations for 2024 that are either in REITs or in general fund for capital. And I can say, historically or recent years, we had a study of all of our facilities it's called the Ming study. We did review those in detail, and nothing in those were critical that had to be done this next year. And then there was other items such as the jail work center, hardening, and other infrastructure that we are recommending that falls within one of the three funds of general fund, REIT 1 or REIT 2. But there's more work to be done moving forward on these. You can see most of the recommendations on this one is one time, which is the blue line towards the bottom, total forecast modifiers of 2.8 million, and then the ongoing is only 14,000. So a lot of this is one-time funding. This also is one that we tend to fall back on when we can, when general fund is not available to cover it because we don't have enough funding. Sometimes REIT 1 is the one that we can fall back on. Of course, it does have some restrictions, but it is less restricted than REIT 2. So I think for me, the information I want to be clear on is we have more work to do on capital projects. We have more capital projects than what's being recommended, and that will continue to evaluate. And we need to be cautious on how much we're spending out of this, as it is a fallback for a lot of general fund projects as well.
A couple of questions on, I thought we were really close to having the transfer between 2 and 1 completed. How many years out?
The loan was done. So the loan that we had to do before was paid off last year or the year before. This is just an allowable transfer by RCW from REIT 2, which is more restrictive, into REIT 1 to be used.
Okay, so we're just allowed that flexibility. So the debt or transfer has been concluded.
Yes.
Okay, so the other question I had is, obviously, this is a national issue on mortgage rates and property transfers, and our document recording fees are way down. There was, at least to me, a warning, a yellow flag on the field when Camas said their revenues were down as a result of limited property transfers. What are we seeing or projecting if we are able? I mean, how are REIT 1 and REIT 2, are they variable? Are they pretty solid? I mean, what are we looking for as far as growth or retraction?
We are seeing things stabilize, just like we are with the sales tax. We're seeing things come down to some standard year-over-year projections. We did project our revenues pretty conservatively over the last few years at about a 6% year-over-year rate, and we're projecting that will stay the same. We're watching it very closely, though. Right now, we're seeing things kind of stabilize and come in on budget, but as with these unprecedented years with the pandemic, we've got to kind of watch year over year. But right now, we're looking very solid. And as Kathleen mentioned, I just would really like to reiterate that the capital improvement plan, most organizations, it takes about 3 to 5 years to really get that established. And these larger fund balances in the REAP funds, those are things that we need to fully recognize and commit to our ongoing capital needs as well. So hoping we can get some of this allocated and used. But yeah, it's looking like it's coming in as projected.
And before we go on to REAP 2, I'm thankful Mark Gasway is joining us from his vacation across the world, and just kindly reminded me on the Community Development Fund, the Building Fund, it is restrictive funding and can only be spent on supporting building activities. So while there is available funding, we just need to be mindful that it is restrictive, and we can go into more detail on that in the future. Okay. So again, this is REAP 2, 6-year forecast. This is the more restrictive of the REAPs. The beginning fund balance is about $27.5 million, revenues at $9 million, expenditures at $10.7 million, and 2024 recommendations is $2.6 million moving forward. And this is also one that can be impacted if Ken's group has projects and maybe they don't have the staffing or the capacity to do it. It doesn't mean that we don't have a need for that funding. It might be capacity in actually getting them done. So.
I have a quick question. I'm just wondering to what degree that has been happening, that we haven't been able to get projects done for lack of staff.
I'll get a list for you and provide it to council.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now we're going to go into the property tax levy overview and recommendations. So for property taxes and how they're calculated, it is a formula that is established by the state. The assessor and the treasurer administer the property tax. They do not determine the billing amount. The state has a budget-based system of property tax. There's 3 main components that you can see here, which is the levy amount, assessed value, and levy rate. And Kristen, if you can go down just a little bit more, you can see the formula there that is actually used, there you go, to get that amount. The next slide is just talking about the property tax levies. So supporting the budget each year the council will consider different property tax levies, including the general fund. That also includes 3 subordinate levies: the road fund, conservation features, Greater Clark Parks District. I will say the Greater Clark Parks District levy is considered separately when the council convenes as the Greater Clark Parks District Board, which happens right before the annual budget hearing. You start it that way. Property tax is continuing to be stable. It does grow with new construction and a possible 1% annual increase if voted for by the council. And just as a reminder, the recommendations for general fund and road fund is the 1% conservation features. I am not recommending that 1% as we have a healthy balance for 2024. This slide shows, and I summarized them a little bit when we went over general fund and road fund, but this provides what the revenue impact would be, both for the 1% and bank capacity, and the impact based on the median household price of $520,000. So just again, in summary, for the general fund, the revenue would be just over $759,000 per year, and that amount that would be charged per year for 1% is $4.03 per year. The road fund 1% would have a revenue of $485,000, bank capacity of just over 20,000, with a total impact of $5.80 per year based on that median household, and that's the $5.57, so the 1% and the 23 cents for bank capacity. Conservation features, again, this is not being recommended, but if it was, you can see the 1% and the bank capacity of the revenue that would be collected if it was taken and what that annual impact would be. And then the MPD and parks, The revenue impact for 1% is just over 41,000, and the impact of that per year is 72 cents. With the general fund, there are options to support the 3 subordinate levies, which is mental health, developmental disabilities, and veterans assistance. And hopefully I will say this correctly, but I've got Emily and others here to correct me if I'm wrong. So if council approves the 1%, then the decision will be to either take the 2024 flat rate, so the 1.3 million, or the general fund 1%. So the 1% has a tie to that or the flat rate. If the council does not support the 1% and it's 0, the council still has a choice between the 2024 flat rate or the 0% column there. Did I say that correctly? Okay. It's a very technical calculation, and I appreciate the staff in the assessor's office who really provide the technical knowledge and expertise on this.
Could you say it one more time?
Yes. So if council takes and approves the 1% for general fund, the choice will be to either take the general fund 1%, which would be like 885,000 for mental health, or the flat rate of 1.3 million. If it's 0%, it would be the choice between the 0% and the flat rate. So the flat rate is always an option, and the other option would be based on what council adopts. Of course.
Question. There is hardly any difference between the numbers in the columns for general fund 1% and 0%. Why is that?
I don't know that one.
It's based on the calculations. It's quite a complicated spreadsheet, but we could definitely try to break that down. I would want to follow up on that. We do have the assessor's office available on the call today. And I don't know, Jill, if you felt like you wanted to answer that at the work session, or if we wanted to follow up after the fact, but no, she's here.
She just got things over.
That might be something that would require our examination of some of those spreadsheets to prepare for the discussion that you would bring forth.
Hey, good afternoon or good morning, Council. This is Michael Fish, Chief Deputy Assessor. I'm available to speak to that if you would like. So, Councilor Chair, you asked the difference between the general fund 0% for these subordinate levies and the 1%. Really, this is just a portion of the county's general fund overall budget. So these are subordinate levies. So the difference in increase, like when we looked at the overall general fund 1%, I forget what the exact number was, but I think, Kathleen, it's in the 700,000 range. This is just a portion of that. So that's why there's such a small difference between the increase. It's a proportional increase based on the overall general fund, whether we take the 0% or the 1%. I hope that answers the question, but feel free to follow up if I did not.
Well, clearly it's more complicated than that. And at some point, I would like to see the spreadsheets that you referred to that undergird these numbers being derived, because frankly, I don't understand it.
All right, we will follow up with that.
Thank you.
Okay,
Chair?
so the next, go ahead, Councilor Young, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. You know, I would like to, have we been in this, okay, first of all, I would like to clarify that this particular fund that we're talking about is the funding that eventually goes to the Veterans Assistance Center, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Just on the
So-
Veterans Assistant line item.
Yes, So I don't know how we could include this in this process because I know this is a really hefty process, the whole entire budget, but I would like to somehow have some more discussion on this particular fund and which, which amount we plan to adopt for its budget, because I've had some conversations with the Veterans Assistance Center, and they are experiencing some significant challenges with mental health and are looking to grow their program to include a mental health aspect to their program to help veterans that are struggling. So I don't know have we been in communication with the Veterans Assistance Center to ask them and to better understand what their needs are?
I have not, but I believe, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the funds that you're looking at here, they're established, the calculation is established by RCW. So if there's going to be a recommendation from council to provide additional funding, that would probably have to come through general fund.
Right. So my understanding, though, is that we could adopt the 2024 flat rate or the 1% or the 0%, depending on what we choose. And there's, significant difference in those funding amounts. So my question was, when we go to make that final decision on the amount of that, I'd like to have some more conversation with the Veterans Assistance Center to better understand their needs. Do they need that extra funding? Do they not need it? What would they use it for? Those types of questions. It to me, to just arbitrarily make a decision on how much funding for them without their input does not makes much sense to me.
This is Michael Torres. Do you want me to jump in, County Manager? I just wanted to communicate. We do talk with the Veterans Assistance Center. They do have they provided a proposed budget for 2024, and which is right around $800,000. That number for the Veterans Assistance there is the amount of dollars that would go into the fund over that period of time. It doesn't reflect the fund balance, and the existing fund balance is sufficient to meet their proposed budget for 2024, which includes their projected needs and growth for indigent veterans. Just as a reminder, the Veterans Assistance Fund by RCW, the eligibility for who can receive those funds is limited to indigent veterans based on primarily based on their income. So the Veterans Assistance Center does have some additional needs which cannot be met through the Veterans Assistance Fund. That's about $200,000, an additional $200,000 above their proposed budget for the fund. But that they will, regardless of what the Veterans Fund balance is, they will have to do some separate fundraising for that, because the population they're trying to serve is not eligible for Veterans Assistance Fund dollars. And I hope that makes sense. I guess the big picture wise, we've spoken with them. We have a proposed budget from them that is acceptable to them, and the existing fund balance is sufficient to sustain that budget. And I think that whatever you choose in these three options, the existing fund balance will be sufficient for that proposed budget.
Thank you for that clarification. And just one kind of further detail ask on that. Are they aware that these options are available for selection? So the difference in funding levels, are they aware of that?
They are, and I think the understanding of what the different levels are really varies depending on who on the Veterans Assistance Board you're talking about and who in the Veterans Advisory Board you're talking about. The budget office, the county budget office, has presented to the Veterans Advisory Board several times to explain how that works.
And when was approximately the last time that was reviewed with them?
We were at their June meeting this summer, 2023.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And if I could add a couple of comments. So first of all, Glenn, I'm heartened to hear your interest. And these are good questions. But I know over the years, and Michael's very involved. I mean, he was just at their board meeting. What, Michael, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I mean, first and foremost, we have an incredibly poor veteran center. I mean, the facility itself is miserable, very constrained. And most veterans that are disabled cannot even access the second floor because of the steep, narrow stairway. There's not a whole lot of accommodation for any homeless veterans. I mean, I'm hopeful at some point that it gets into our capital plan because, I was hoping that the city of Vancouver was actually going to provide a different facility, but that never came about. So first and foremost, capital infrastructure is a dire need of our local veterans assistance. And I want to point out also that the local VHA has a campus here in Vancouver that's really second to none. They provide great services, but most of the veterans that are serviced by this Veterans Assistance Fund don't qualify for veterans
Chair, I think
services.
we're going to mute you really quick, Chair. We're getting a lot of feedback.
In any case, so I hope you understood that some that we're characterizing as veterans or homeless veterans or veterans that are impoverished don't qualify for veteran services, either because they had a bad conduct discharge or dishonorable discharge, or they never served long enough to be actually qualified for different services. So the reach of our Veterans Assistance Center is much broader than either the Portland or Vancouver campus to provide services. So anyway, I'm hoping you keep that interest and help find a new building for them, because I think that would be a great start. And circling back to the discussion on the mental health fund, if we can find a nonprofit to support the local Veterans Assistance Program for mental health care that you just identified, that's the solution right there.
Yeah, and this, thank you for those comments. This kind of comes back to our conversation in the Mental Health Sales Tax Advisory Board. Is a nonprofit, just like we see the Veterans Assistance Center, how they develop a program that, they don't have that expertise, that skill, and nor do they have the staff time to be able to devote to try to develop that program. So my vision of, this incubator program that we've been talking about is facilitating a way for these small nonprofits to be able to develop their program and make it more accessible, more services available that are so desperately needed.
The chair. Okay, I'm not hearing any other questions right now. And so the next few slides, we won't go over them. It's just the actual decision packages that we've already talked about for the 1% and what's being recommended and what's not being recommended, which is conservation features. So, Kristen, if you just want to quickly go through those budget reports. I think it's slide 53. There you go. So this is just where we have to satisfy legal requirements with regards to our budget reports, but we also want to be transparent, both with staff, council, and our community. So this is where we can find all of the budget reports, which is on the budget's website. And next steps, if there's any additional questions from council today or before the public hearing, both Emily and I and all of our colleagues who are with us today are more than happy to go into any further detail and answer any questions. If you have any feedback or discussion, and again, the public hearings start the first week of December. And I'll have to double check, but just as a kind reminder for the rules of procedure, if any counselor wants to amend or provide an amendment in the budget process, I believe it said 48 hours before the hearing. I personally would ask a little bit sooner notice so that Emily and our staff can actually be prepared to support council's requests for the hearing itself. And I think that is it. Have I missed anything? Okay. So I, again, want to thank Emily. This is really her and her team's work. We will unmute the chair, yes, to see if there's any further questions. And again, I want to express my sincere thank you to all of the departments and electeds, because this is a lot of work. And I will also state again, this is probably the hardest budget process that I've been privy to because of the number of requests and their needed requests, but not the ability to support all of them. So with that, I will hand it back over to council and chair. I think you're unmuted as well, so I will hand that back over to you all.
Okay, thank you very much. I, too, along with all of the council, just expresses incredible thanks for the level of detail that you have provided. And I also have to thank you for not going into the details of all 300 requests the way you have had to do in the past. This worked out very well. We have a clear understanding, I believe, of what is being requested, and your recommendations are very clear. Anyone who is going to be part of the public hearing when the council adoption of the annual budget takes place, December 4 and so on, I would encourage you to go online and read in detail the slides that were presented to us today, because they are clear, they are well organized, and I think it would ready you for the public hearing in a way that maybe nothing else would. So I encourage you to do that. Meanwhile, though, are there questions, not debate, but questions from council on what we have heard today?
Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
So I have a couple comments, I guess, if you want to call them that. So one of the things that I would like to better understand is, and I appreciate the county manager's recommendations, and this is a very difficult process. One of the things that I would like to better understand is the proposed budget or recommended budget at this point. What does that mean for our level of services throughout all the different departments? Is this maintaining our existing level of service? And I also would like to, this is something for a later date, is I feel like we need to make have a more holistic conversation about our level of services throughout all of the services that we offer. Are we doing what the public wants? Are we doing more? Are we doing less? And do we need to adjust in some way or another? But this particular budget, what does it mean for the level of services? For example, roads. I know that, roads, the recommendation is to take that 1%. From my understanding, that 1% increase is not going to amount anywhere near close to what inflation how it's impacted that fund. So does this recommendation lead to a lower level of service? Does it lead to an equal level? You know, that type of thing for me to understand. And then that will help to better understand the requests that are coming in. Are those requests to maintain existing level of service? Are they to an attempt to improve the level of service? You know, what is the background behind that request? What is it seeking to accomplish? And then the last comment that I have is we have gone through a long period of growth. And I know from my own personal experience in the private sector that when you go through a long period of growth, you have to make a lot of adjustments to adapt to that growth. And it over time it creates a lot of inefficiencies that you may not recognize without pausing, kind of taking a step back and looking at how you're operating, how you're processing. And so from my understanding, the state offers a free audit of probably most, if not all, of our different departments in how we're operating to identify any inefficiencies that might be there. And, you know, when we have such major requests like this, you know, I can't imagine that most of the requests are not something that are truly needed in our county. But you know, when we're up against evaluating one request versus another, I think it would behoove that department to go through that audit, identify anything that they can change or adapt to become more efficient to work with the resources that they currently have. Because personally, as a policymaker, I am much more willing to approve a request that has a background that you know has documentation showing that, hey, we are doing things as efficiently as possible. We have audited ourselves. We know that there's no way that we can adapt to make things better with the current resources that were allocated. So I just would encourage all of the different departments to do their best to take a look at how they're operating and, you know, recognize that this large period of growth has for sure guaranteed led to some inefficiencies, and we need to identify those and clean those up before we look at new requests. And then if it's still needed after that good hard look, then let's talk about it. Those are my comments. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation. I feel like it was a very effective discussion today.
Thank you, Counselor. And are there other Counselor comments, questions? Not debate.
Just one more from me. Thank you. And I would like to thank everyone who's worked on this. I know this is a monumental task to pull this budget together, and that there are a lot of needs out there, and it would be good to further evaluate those needs and have the public get a sense of what is not being provided. But one piece of information that I think would be helpful is if we could look at, I know when someone gets their property tax bill, it can be very confusing and it just seems to be going up and up and up, but it would be good to take a look at and see what percentage, just on average, is the percentage that comes to the county, because in that property tax bill, schools, fire department, many other things, it would be good just to have that perspective.
I concur with what you're saying, and Counselor, it's often, I think, very surprising to people when they realize that of that total bill, a relatively small percentage actually is coming directly to the county for its use. And you've probably experienced that as well, and who knows, that may be a basis for your suggestion as well. Are there other comments from council?
Yeah, just a brief segue on that. I mean, the assessor has done that presentation before, and it is pretty evident right on your property tax bill that most of the taxes that are on there, the public voted on, and put in place themselves. It isn't part of this 1% process or bank capacity process that the council is responsible for. And a lot of the public really doesn't look at that small print on their tax bill as to where their tax dollars originated from, but most of them were, again, voted for by the public in one manner or another. I do want to thank the county manager and the finance team and everyone that put so much work into this. This is a lot of work. And to those that made all of these requests for new full-time staffing, I mean, you're not losing out. I mean, there are no real winners or losers. We're trying to fill the gaps that we know need filling. And first and foremost, that was our sheriff's department and our jail services. We knew that, and we've got a great start on our public defense office, indigent services. You know, this is really hard business. So all those departments that are looking like they're not going to have their packages recommended, please keep doing what you're doing and work hard and look for efficiencies. But I mean, this is a concerted effort. No one is a winner or loser in this. We're just trying to have the most pragmatic look at the best use of the available resources we have to keep this county government functioning in the way it should. So thanks for the hard work and the tough recommendations you're making. I, for one, really appreciate it. And then the last thing I want to say is, please, no last-minute amendments by any single counselor that come out of the blue on any package.
I concur with that. Having seen where that has happened in the past, it shouldn't happen now. Given that this was a work session and that we have covered a lot of territory, I would propose that we bring the work session to a close at this time and take our break, moving to the council time agenda at 1 p.m. today. If there are no objections to that suggestion, then that is exactly what we'll do. Is there anything for the good of the order? And thank you. Hearing nothing at this time. Again, huge thanks to staff for what you have prepared for this work session. It has meant a great deal to us and to the county, and we thank you. So to everyone, we'll see you back on council time agenda at 1 p.m. Thank you sincerely.